The next thing I want to do is add Twitter to my login options. But I can't really do that until I've set up a Twitter app as well. So let's head over to Twitter and do that. So I'm just going to click Create New App. And I'm going to name it Pluralsight Demo. And the description is going to be Pluralsight Demo App Description. The website URL is http://www.owin.demo. And the callback URL is going to be that same www.owin.demo/signin-twitter. And finally, we need to agree to the terms and conditions before we click the Create Your Twitter Application. And there it is, our very own Twitter application. The next step is to head back to Visual Studio and do the actual integration. And the first thing we need to do is obviously add some more NuGet goodness. In this case, we need to add the package microsoft.owin.security.twitter. And with that package in place, let's just head back to the startup.cs file and add the Twitter authentication middleware to the pipeline. And as usual, we do that using the app.useTwitterAuthentication, and we pass in a new instance of Twitter authentication options. The actual configuration of the Twitter authentication middleware is very similar to the one we did for the Facebook authentication middleware. But the setting that was called App ID for Facebook is called Consumer Key for Twitter, and we find that on the Twitter website under Keys and Access Tokens. So let's just copy that across. And the setting that Facebook calls App Secret, Twitter calls Consumer Secret. And that's also available on the Twitter website. And finally, we need to tell it to sign in as the application cookie authentication type. And there it is, a fully configured Twitter authentication middleware. The next step is to give the user the option to actually log in using Twitter. But instead of doing what I did for Facebook and add a hard-coded link to Twitter, I'm actually going to make it a bit more flexible. I'm already adding the second social login provider, and I might be adding more in the future. So hard-coding the link for Facebook and Twitter and then having to hard-code another one and another one just seems stupid. So let's head over to the auth controller, because that's where I need to make my changes. So what I want to do here is use the login model to pass a list of authentication providers to the view and then have the view render a link for each one of them dynamically. To get hold of a list of providers, I'm going to use the http context.getOwinContext and then .authentication.getAuthentication types. This is a method you can use to get hold of the different authentication providers in the system. It takes a delegate to filter the providers so you only get the ones that you want. In this case, I only want the providers that have a caption. And finally, I call toList to execute the query and get my list. And now that I have my list of authentication providers, I'm just going to write model.authProviders equals providers, and then I'm going to use Visual Studio to add the property to my login model class. With that in place, it's time to make sure that the view renders a list of available authentication providers to the user. So let's head over to the login.cs.html file. So instead of having that hard-coded HTML link that I've got right now, I want to go ahead and create a for each loop that iterates over each one of the providers in the model.authProviders. And for each one of the providers, I want to create a div and an HTML action link with the text login with, and then append the provider.caption to get the name of the provider. And then I want to change the target action from login Facebook to social login. And finally, I want to add a route value called ID, which is set to the provider's authentication type. And the next thing I need to do is obviously create that social login action. So let's just head over to the auth controller and do that. But since I'm not going to use the login Facebook action anymore, I'm just going to rename that to social login. And I'm going to add that string parameter called ID that I added as a route value. And finally, I'm just going to switch out the hard-coded string Facebook to that passed in ID value. And with that last change, there's nothing left but to press F5 and see if it actually works. Okay, so we get hello from MVC. But let's head over to /secret to see if we get to log in with Twitter. Okay, so that wasn't really what I was expecting when I clicked that link. But there's a fairly simple explanation to why it happened. The Twitter authentication middleware checks the SSL certificate at the other end to make sure that it's communicating with Twitter. However, when Twitter changes its certs, once in a while the middleware is not updated fast enough and you end up with this problem. Luckily, this validation is actually configurable using the backchannel certificate validator property on the Twitter Authentication Options class. And using this property, we can solve the problem in two ways. The first one is to just set the backchannel certificate validator to null. This will remove any certificate validation that's in place, which is not a good idea if you want to put your application into production. The other solution would be to create a certificate validator that will actually validate the new certificate for you as well. You could, for example, do something like this, where I've created a certificate thumbprint validator configured with all the certificate thumbprints that Twitter might be using. However, for this demo, I'm just going to remove the validation and press F5 and see if we get to log in without it. And /secret. Okay, so we get to Twitter at least. That's a good thing. And yes, Twitter is in Swedish because I'm from Sweden. But let's try and log in and see if it works. So that says redirecting you back to the application. And there we have it. We're logged in as a Twitter user. And if we look at the claims, we've got 4 of them in this case. We've got the name identifier and the name that we're used to. And then we get URN:/Twitter:/user ID and URN:/Twitter:/screen name. So that means that we have fully working Twitter authentication in place.